This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
You know it's officially baseball season when we've gone back-to-back baseball guests here on Play-by-Playcast. Yeah, that's the reason. That is how you know it's baseball season, when we go back-to-back baseball guests here on Play-by-Playcast. Welcome back in, everybody. Thanks as always for clicking subscribe and or download, joining us here again on a Friday morning. Please remember, if you get an opportunity during, after, before you listen to the pod, give us a rating or review. It's real easy. Just flip over to that screen on your iTunes podcast app thingamajig and hit the 5-star button or the 4-star button. If you're going to hit the 3-star button, just save that for another pod. Leave us a rating or a review and interact with the pod as well. We're on social media at PXPcast. I am at Joel Godet. All right, our guest today. We had Kevin Fitzgerald last week from the Kohler Fireflies and from ESPN as well. Kohler Fireflies, of course, very famous right now because Tim Tebow is their starting right fielder, who, by the way, I went to see last week. Quick aside, before we get to Jim Rosenhaus, went to see the Kohler Fireflies play last week. Got home from the Mid-American Conference Baseball Tournament, had Kevin on the pod, and we were talking, realized we weren't going to be that far apart. Got in the car, drove down to Lexington, Kentucky last Saturday, which is about a 3-hour drive, not that bad. And I'm a history nerd, so I did some historical stuff in Lexington during the day, and then met up with Fitz to go see him, but also Tim Tebow play right field. And the Lexington Legends and Columbia Fireflies got rained out last Saturday, so I did not see Tim Tebow at all. But I did get a really sweet Coach Calipari bobblehead out of it, so that's kind of cool. And then I got to spend some time with Fitz in person and went out for some adult beverages, and then it got late, so I actually stayed with Fitz and his broadcast partner, Sam Hyman. They let me crash in their hotel room before I drove. I actually went to Louisville on Sunday, caught the ACC Tournament Championship, and then drove home. But I put 2 chairs together. This is single broadcaster living right here. Bummed hotel room with a broadcaster friend, and because they didn't have an extra bed, instead of sleeping on the floor, I put 2 chairs together and slept there. That is not the first time I've done that, too. I don't know if that's a good thing or a sad thing. But fun weekend as well. If you haven't gotten the opportunity to go back and listen to last week's episode with Kevin Fitzgerald, we talk a lot about Tim Tebow. We talk a lot about baseball broadcasting. We talk a lot about getting really his inroads in at the 4-Letter Network over at ESPN. So if you haven't had a chance, go take a look at that and all the other back episodes as well. Quick point of clarification on last week's episode 2. Fitz and I told some stories about some different guys, and one of the ones that came up was about Jason Benetti. And when he was a minor league broadcaster in Salem, Virginia, and his general manager was a guy by the name of John Katz, who is now the general manager of the Kohler Fireflies, whom Kevin Fitzgerald works for. And Fitz was telling this story that John Katz had told him about the time he thought that Jason had read like nutritional facts of water on the air in the 15th inning of a game. And Benetti texted me after the episode came out last week, and I have to issue a correction, because it was not nutritional facts of water. And I don't even think it was the 15th inning, because the more I thought about it, I was there when this happened. That was the year that I worked with Jason. He actually read the ingredients on the back of a bottle of hand sanitizer that was left in the booth, and I think it was the 12th inning. I don't remember. But I will say this. It doesn't sound as ridiculous and offbeat. Or I guess it sounds more ridiculous and offbeat than it really was. we walked into the booth. The only thing there was a bottle of hand sanitizer. And Jason, being the snark that he can be sometimes, and I mean that in every good way possible, just kind of picked it up and he goes, "What are they suggesting?" And when the game got long, we read what was in the bottle, because that's what happens in the minor leagues sometimes. So quick factual clarification. It was not nutritional facts of water. It was ingredients of hand sanitizer. Also, congrats are in order, by the way, for JB. The big news out of Chicago this week with his multi-year deal and expanded role with the White Sox. So congratulations to him. Number one, because he's an awesome broadcaster. Number two, because he's an awesome person. So kudos there. And then kudos to friend of the pod as well, Alex Faust, who the news broke today as I record this, yesterday as you listen to it, that he is the new television play-by-play voice of the Los Angeles Kings. You can go back and listen to the Alex Faust episode of this podcast as well. I believe it is in the 30s. If you scroll back and want to take a listen to what it was like being a part-time broadcaster and then really breaking in the way Alex Faust has in this industry over the last really 2 years or so. On to this week's guest, though, and that is from the Cleveland Indians, Jim Rosenhaus. And Jim is a saint, first of all, because I reached out to him knowing I was going to be in Cleveland last week for the Mid-American Conference Baseball Tournament, but not knowing my schedule. So I basically reached out to a guy who doesn't know me and I didn't know him. We have the tie. We've both previously worked for the Buffalo Bisons. And I said, "Hey, would you like to do this podcast interview? But I don't really have a way to get to you, so if you might, like, if you're able to come to me, that would be huge. Also, I don't know when we can do it because I don't know my schedule. Also, I don't know how long I'm going to be there because it's a tournament and we can get eliminated." And Jim said yes. And we tried to make it work, and it wound up not working out in person just because of the Indians' travel schedule and then Jim's actual schedule and then the fact that the Cardinals only lasted 2 days. So I was kind of home earlier than I expected to be. So we did it on the phone this week, and Jim and I were able to talk for about a half an hour. He had a couple interviews the morning that we taped this, but it was a really good half-hour conversation, and I'm really excited about it. And it's different off the top, and that's where we start this episode. And it's a conversation we really haven't had with anybody to this point, which is why I'm really excited about this one. Jim took a risk, a huge risk, when he joined the Cleveland Indians, because Jim was a career play-by-play guy. He had spent time in the Carolina League, and then he became the voice of the Buffalo Bisons, and he was there for 11 years until 2007, when he got an opportunity to go to the Cleveland Indians, but not as a play-by-play guy. And we've seen some guys make similar jumps in recent years as well for various teams, but it's a hard jump to make. And Jim will detail it. The point was made clear. This is not a play-by-play job. And he decided to make the move to go take a major league job that was not calling play-by-play to kind of gamble and bet on himself. And a couple of years later, the bet on himself paid because in 2012, he was hired as Tom Hamilton's full-time partner in the Cleveland Indians booth. So Jim Rosenhaus has an interesting story that is a little bit different than anybody that we've really talked to in the 50 episodes of this podcast previously. So I was excited to dive into that and a whole lot more, including the World Series, including his approach to preparation, including his approach to what makes baseball great on radio. All of those things are on this edition of Play-by-Playcast with Cleveland Indians broadcaster Jim Rosenhaus.
Well, it was hard because I really enjoyed my time in Buffalo, and I was happy with what I was doing. I love the city and had great friends there, and the Bisons were a tremendous organization to work for. So, at that point, having been there as long as I was and the amount of time I was in the minor leagues, I was kind of just figuring that's where I would be. Because it's a needle in a haystack. There's just not many jobs at the major league level. So I think you do the best you can where you are and you enjoy where you are. And I certainly felt like I found a great spot in Buffalo. But the job did open up with the Indians, not play-by-play. And that was made made very clear that there would be no play-by-play, especially the first year, even if there were times where the main announcer, Tom Hamilton, was on vacation or anything like that. They already had fill-in people. They wanted to make sure that I just concentrated on the engineering and doing the pregame show and some other responsibilities. So that was the big decision. Did I want to stay at AAA and be the play-by-play voice of the Bisons and then call every game and things like that, or go for a much less prominent role, albeit in the major leagues? And ultimately, that's what I decided to do. I called a bunch of people and bounced the idea off of them. And the general consensus was, if you can get to the major leagues, if indeed that's your dream, being there put you in a better spot than where I was, because you're front and center with people who would make those decisions down the road. But again, no guarantees. There was no, certainly not what I'm doing now was not available then, and I don't think they saw that coming down the road. But they asked if I'd be willing to do that, and so we did take that leap of faith, and fortunately everything has worked out. But it was a really, really hard decision at the time.
Obviously, yeah. I mean, it all works out in the end, but what's it like for you once you've taken that job now and you're in those first couple of years where you know they've already said, hey, there's no play-by-play in this, but like there's got to be a granule in the back of your mind that's thinking, all right, how do I keep doing what I do, but also positioning myself, like you said, if you're in the major leagues, you're closer to it, you're giving yourself more of an opportunity, continuing to position myself to get to where I ultimately want to be while still thriving in this new role that you've got?
Well, I think, it's funny and this sounds crazy. There are a lot of other reasons, but I think part of the reason I made the move, I had great support from my family. My wife was awesome about it. And she said, hey, it's a great adventure. Let's go for it and all that kind of stuff. And part of it is, if that's your dream, what you want to do, just the key part being I was able to travel with the team. I think if it had been a studio position, I might have given it much more pause in terms of leaving. But because I traveled with the team, was in the booth every night, that type of thing, and would meet different people, what a great chance to see Major League Baseball, all these stadiums that you read about and maybe haven't seen. And so from that standpoint, it was a lot of fun. And then once you get into it, sure, do you want to do play-by-play? Absolutely. That's what you're trained to do. But I always went back to what they told me when they hired me, is that, focus on what you're hired to do. And, maybe the other stuff will take care of itself down the road with no promises, but focus on what you were hired to do. So that's what I tried to do. And then you have an opportunity to work behind. At that point, I think Tom Hamilton had been here, 15 years, maybe a little bit more than that. And then Mike Hegan, who was the other announcer on the broadcast team, he had been there a long time as well. So what a great opportunity to learn from them. I think sometimes when you're at a certain spot, you think, well, everything there is to know, and I don't know that I ever thought that, but what a great opportunity to learn if there are differences at the major league level as opposed to the minor league level, of which the game itself is pretty darn similar, and it's still building relationships and getting along with people, I think, is the biggest key and the biggest similarities between the two. So that part's different, but I learned a ton from Tom and Mike, and really used that time to try and learn some things while I wasn't doing the games on the air.
I was going to say, what did you learn in not doing play-by-play, but just being around it? How did you get better at doing play-by-play when the time rolled around?
Well, I think the one thing that was pleasantly surprising is that even though these guys had been there for more than a decade, and many more years than that, and in some cases, the preparation they put in on a daily basis, and never taking a game off, so to speak, but their daily preparation was much greater than anything that I had been exposed to where I was. And part of that is, as you know, Joel, in the minor leagues, you're asked to do a bunch of different things. So I'll be honest with you, there were days at AAA where by the time I got done with the responsibilities for team travel and some other things, you went on the air without ever reading a newspaper or notes or anything like that. You're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants out of necessity, which is what made the minor leagues fun. Absolutely.
Here's the 3 stories I didn't tell last night.
Yeah, right. So you just kind of, there were a lot of days where you just had so many other things going on that the game was unfortunately almost an afterthought. But once you're here, this is your job, and the most important thing is what goes out over the air. And I think that was probably the biggest takeaway from that time.
What's your prep like now at the major league level on a daily basis? That involves, what kind of things do you read? Who do you talk to? What's a regular day for you in that regard?
Well, certainly, before you even get to the park, or I do have an office at the ballpark when we're at home. You read your newspaper stuff from the day before, and the opposing teams as well, and then just websites and anywhere you can get information, kind of recapping what's been going on in Major League Baseball the night before. So injuries to key players and things like that. So that, you try and spend a good amount of time just kind of finding stories that might have happened the day before. And then the key with when you read your newspaper clips and the opposing team's clips is that you'll have some things to talk about when you go downstairs from the night before. And when I say go downstairs, when you go down to the field and into the clubhouses. And that's probably the biggest key for me is because I still do the pregame show and I get interviews and things like that. That time that the clubhouses are open and the players are on the field coming out for batting practice and things like that, that's so valuable to talk to players and coaches, not only from the Indians, but from the other team as well. And that can lend itself to some good things during the broadcast.
What are those conversations like? And how do you get into them? Just from the standpoint of, there's obviously probably a lot of guys you want to get to, and you're there to get information, but you don't want to seem like you're there to get information, if that makes sense. How do you go about it the right way in terms of getting what you need and also developing relationships, because these are all people that you're around all the time?
I'm not sure what the right way is. You're right. You don't want to be there all the time, so that you can tell if you walk in and they see you and then they scatter for the trainer's room. Obviously that's not good, but I think with your own guys, when's a good time to approach them and talk about different stuff. And a lot of times it's just, for instance, here, the Cavaliers are in the finals, and I know certain guys go to games as much as they can if there's an off night or we have a day game and that type of thing.
Okay.
So there's something to talk about. Hey, what do you think of the Cavs game last night? Or if a guy's from Chicago, like a Jason Kipnis, and the Bulls are in the playoffs, or the Blackhawks, and I know he's a fan of both. You talk about stuff like that because, if you just talked about his game the night before every time, that might be a struggle. So that's how you get to know him more on a personal level and things like that. And as far as the other teams go, a lot of times it's just, for instance, the White Sox, we played them early in the season, and they have a shortstop named Tim Anderson, who's one of the better young shortstops in baseball. And just reading through the media guide, he did not play high school baseball till his junior year and has had this quick rise to the major leagues. So that was the opener for me. And I went down and sought him out in the clubhouse and just asked him, why didn't you play till your junior year? And he had a great story about being more into basketball and how he was encouraged to play by a buddy of his, and he just went to a tryout on a lark because a buddy said, hey, you ought to play baseball. So stuff like that. Like you try and look in the media guides so that when you go down there and you want to talk to somebody, you have something to talk about with them.
How do you think all the time you spent in the minor leagues informed and prepared what you're able to do now in this role in terms of preparation, in terms of game execution, in terms of all of those things? That makes what you do now a little bit easier?
Wouldn't trade it for anything. 16 years between A-ball and AAA. And, I guess, I think one of the biggest takeaways from my time there is how hard the game is, appreciating how hard it is to reach the major leagues, because there were a lot of outstanding players at AAA that either never got a shot or were up for just a little bit, and it just didn't work out. And they spent a lot of time playing very well at a very high level at AAA. And it just shows you it is really, if you make the major leagues in baseball, you're ready to go. You have done your time and served your apprenticeship, and you should be prepared to play at a really, really high level. So that was a takeaway. And just from a broadcasting standpoint, certainly building the relationships. And it's actually a little bit easier in the minor leagues because I think everybody's kind of in the same boat.
Sure.
And it's a little bit different when you get to the major leagues. You don't see them as much in your travel situation as maybe you do in the minor leagues. But it's still the same thing in terms of building relationships and talking to players. And to be honest with you, it was pretty easy when I first got here because the Bisons were an Indians AAA club.
So you knew all the guys.
At the time, there were quite a few players who I had seen in the last year, 2 or 3 during my time in Buffalo that were now key players with Cleveland, and that made it a lot easier, and including the coaching staff too. So that made it a lot easier. I
was going to say, is that one of those things too where you're thinking as a minor league broadcaster coming up in terms of creating relationships and developing connections, just getting in touch with the big league club that you so often work with and being able to create those relationships? How integral kind of was that to your, I don't want to say strategy because that seems crass, but when you lay out kind of how you want to go about moving yourself forward, is that relationship critical?
In my case, it was. I had not really gotten too far in any other processes, in terms of a job with many other teams. I mean, there were a couple of callbacks, but in terms of ever being brought in for an interview, that did not happen. And whether that, it could have been a reflection of my work that they just didn't like it. But I think what the key was in this situation, Curtis Danberg, who interned with the Bisons and then moved on and was working with the Indians. He's the one who tipped me off to the job opening initially and said, hey, this isn't open yet, but get your stuff down here because something may happen. That was huge. And then once I got into the process, being able to have Eric Wedge, who was a manager in Buffalo and was then the manager with the Indians, to be able to call him and say, can you put a good word in for me? It got to the point where the person who had the ultimate final say in the hiring, I did not know her. But as I found out after I was hired, she said they almost didn't hire me because she was sick of people coming into her office who knew me from different either coaches or player development people who had come through Buffalo, or even Wendy Hoppel is someone who was tremendously helpful from the team travel standpoint. Whenever I had a question, she was the person in Cleveland who would help me. And even that was someone who put in a good word for me. So all those connections were huge in this particular case. And I don't think I would have had that in another situation.
I was going to say, we had Josh Wetzel on the podcast several weeks ago now. And we had the conversation of just kind of how do you get to the major league level? Is there a secret to getting yourself to the major league level? And that's a really broad swath there, but what do you think separates guys that are able to, you mentioned how difficult it is to get to the major leagues as a player. What separates the guys that get there as a broadcaster?
I think some of it is luck. Some of it is timing. If I'm going to guess, anytime there's a major league opening and they get 200 tapes or now websites or however they get the material, I'm going to guess, the final 25 to 30 probably are capable in terms of doing the job. They sound good. They're professional. And I can't imagine how hard it is for the decision makers when you get down to the final 10 and then down, if you have to choose between 2, I can't imagine what that's like. So from that standpoint, it's extremely difficult, and you just have to be the right fit for that organization. If there's a comfort level, which I think I had with people in Cleveland, not only from the decision-making process for the radio job, but just over the years, I mean, I had 11 years in Buffalo when they were the affiliate, and actually 2 other years in Single A Kinston where, I had gotten to know Mark Shapiro when he was first starting out, and he was the team president by the time I got here, and that type of thing. So, I mean, if you're asking it, is there one way or another? I don't know. I think I was fortunate that I had all those things line up at the time that they did, because you could have all those contacts, but have a radio team or a TV team that's there for 20 more years. And by the time there's a change, the people that you knew, or maybe you're in a different spot. So that timing is gone, if that makes sense.
Sure.
It has to line up timing wise. That's why I say, I mean, there are so many good broadcasters at the AAA level, and maybe that timing just doesn't line up right. And you certainly feel lucky when it does.
Read a quote from you, or maybe you had quoted somebody, but it was, "Don't let information get in the way of telling people what's going on," as a philosophy of broadcasting. What's that mean to you, a little bit more in depth?
Well, certainly here, I mean, the reams of information that you have at your disposal is ridiculous. So that you don't want to be sitting there talking about a guy and maybe looking down at your notes and all that, and all of a sudden there's a fly ball heading out of the ballpark and you're missing it. The last thing you want is to be talking about a guy and people are listening at home and hearing the crowd roar and wondering what's going on. So at least on radio, that's the most important thing. Call the play and be able to, do that nice build up so that when there is a big play, you're ready, and then work the other stuff in when you can, because it can be overwhelming. And I think that hit home, during the postseason last year, the amount of information on every player that you get as the postseason got deeper and deeper was just ridiculous, in a good way. But you got to be careful and again, remember why you're there. And that's for the people who can't see the game. You got to tell them what's going on and hopefully, build the drama a little bit too.
They always say that's what makes Scully such a master in terms of storytelling. How do you combine not letting the information get in the way with getting the information in there the right way and being able to weave stories effectively? What's kind of your approach to picking your spots and making sure that things kind of weave into a pretty tapestry?
Well, I think you can kind of, and again, when you say information too, I think the key is not to bog them down with numbers. And my goodness, there certainly is a lot of it now with the launch angles and exit velocities and all that. But I think going back to what we talked to earlier, I enjoy talking more about what I might have talked to a player about before the game and that type of thing, background, how they got to the major leagues, some obstacles they overcame, things like that. But I think what you do is the longer you're around and you see different pitchers, especially your own, who works fast and who doesn't. And if there's runners on base, the game slows down. So that might lend itself to some more of that. But if a guy's really in a good rhythm and he's just blowing through a batting order, it's pretty much calling the plays and save your story for another day, because there'll be one. So I guess that's the key is knowing that you don't have to. You do all this prep work and you don't have to get it all in one game or every game or even a couple of games. It might be something that you talk to a player about in April. And if it's a team you see a couple of times, it might not be a story you tell till August. So I guess that's the key.
How do you deal with the new school of baseball too? I mean, you mentioned launch angles and all that stuff. Ball State played a baseball game a couple of weeks ago, and they struck out 9 times against a pitcher in 5 innings, and he wasn't a huge strikeout pitcher. So I said to one of the guys at the cage the next day, I was like, "Hey, Epps, what happened?" And he said he had a really high spin rate, and the ball just seemed like it was rising. So he and I had this discussion about spin rate, and I went and I researched it a little bit more, and I kind of sat down and I said, I've got to, in order to explain what happened yesterday, I've got to explain what spin rate is and why it's important. And when I did it, I felt like I got kind of bogged down a little bit. How do you explain those things that are kind of evolutions of the game of baseball, and some of them are kind of wonky statistically, to make the point, but not just crush people?
I guess it's tricky. I mean, when you talk about spin rate, I mean, we have a pitcher with the Indians, Trevor Bauer, who is extremely scientific with all that stuff. But I think where you can maybe break it down is when he's talking about spin rate, maybe that used to be what they termed late life on a fastball. It seemed what you just said about, the ball got on the hitter quickly, maybe more so than it looked if you looked at just velocity. And he's pretty good at breaking that stuff down. So I think maybe getting it in those terms, if you can bring it back to, and gosh, our manager, Terry Francona, is great about it. If somebody hits a home run and someone brings up launch angle or exit velocity, he'll just say, well, it ended up halfway up the bleachers, so I guess both of those are pretty good, and that kind of breaks it down. And he's not making fun of those two things, but I think he's getting it back to, if the ball ends up halfway up the bleachers, that means obviously that there was good launch angle and good exit velocity. And I think everybody's different. That's the beauty of the game, and I think we're seeing more of it as time goes by of the more scientific approach. But at least hitting wise, you can tell if a ball goes a long way, there's probably a good launch angle and a good exit velocity. And if a pitcher's striking out a bunch, maybe the spin rates are real good on certain pitches. So I guess you try and manage it without bogging people down.
I know I've only got a couple more minutes of your time, so I want to touch on and bounce around it real quickly if that's okay.
Sure.
I haven't worked with a partner in baseball since my first year doing baseball consistently. And our associate AD here at Ball State is a former baseball coach of ours as well, so I've had him in the booth a couple of times. And I remember the first time I had him in to do color with me, I just kind of sat there and was like, what do I do with Pat? Because it wasn't something I had been used to in a baseball setting. What's the approach like for you? I mean, obviously you worked with Duke for probably 11 years, and now you've got Tom in the booth with you as well, of working baseball with a partner and creating a conversation, but certainly not over-talking the game.
I think it varies with who you work with and their style. And at least here, there's a little bit of back and forth. A lot of times, if I'm on the play-by-play in the middle innings, Tom might be visiting with sponsors or doing some other things like that during that time that he's not doing the play-by-play. So there's not a whole lot of interaction there. But during his innings, I kind of follow his lead. And a lot of times he'll get locked in and kind of goes back to what we said about, just the pace of the game. If the pitcher's really rolling and you just sit back and the play-by-play guy calls the play. Sometimes it'll be different. He takes some vacation and I'll work with a variety of different partners who are former Cleveland Indians. So if I'm working with Mike Hargrove, obviously there's a lot more back and forth. And you just ask him, if you see a certain play, and he was an old first baseman, if there's a certain play by the first baseman, that easily lends itself to something that he would follow. And I think that the biggest key is you listen to their responses, and it might lead you down another road of something really interesting or funny or a good story. But again, based on the game and on radio, you have to be really careful because you don't want to miss something. So that's a big key there.
If I can touch on last year real quick, emotions for you. What's it like dealing with heightened emotions and really tense situations as a broadcaster, especially in baseball, and trying to keep yourself as level as possible when you get to like a Game 7, when Rajai Davis hits a home run, when you're in extra innings, and trying to keep your own cool while everything's going mad around you?
Well, you certainly want to do that, but you want to convey how tense the situation is, and I think fans are looking for that. So you don't want to be too level-headed, but obviously you want to keep it level enough where people know what's going on. And I know Tom was on that call when Rajai hit the home run and through the extra inning, and I mean it. You convey that excitement that's in the ballpark, but also enough where people know exactly what's going on. So, you just kind of roll with it, and I guess you just try and not go too far overboard. And hope we did that in the last couple innings of Game 7. But it certainly is a ton of fun. And I think that one of the biggest keys too is when something big happens is to let people hear the crowd, which was going absolutely bonkers. I think that's really important. That brings them in a little bit and lets them really feel the emotion of the ballpark. And hopefully that was happening in Game 7.
I know I've got to let you go, but if I can ask one more question, because I'd be remiss if I didn't. Your last, if I'm right on this, your last Buffalo Bulls basketball broadcast was an 80-72 win against Ball State, in which Calvin Cage had 30 points and Skip Mills had 38. Do you remember it in any way?
I probably remember a day where Calvin Cage had a big day, but to be honest with you, I don't. I feel like my last game for the Bulls would have been, they would have lost in the MAC tournament.
Well, yeah,
and
correct.
That would have been,
yeah.
But maybe that was the last
regular season
game.
Yep, last regular season.
Yeah, you know what? The year prior, they had gone to the finals of the tournament with the crazy overtime loss to Ohio, and I know that the following season was a pretty good one too. But unfortunately, I don't recall the specifics. I remember Calvin Cage having some good games though his senior year for sure.
I was just putting your broadcaster memory to the test and see what I could dredge up from old school action. That is one of the two Cleveland Indians play-by-play voices. Tom Hamilton, of course, the other on WTAM and the Cleveland Indians radio network in and around Cleveland and Ohio. And I cannot thank Jim enough for taking the time, joining us here on the pod again, and sticking with me as we tried to get that thing scheduled in and around our schedules the previous week and then this week as well when we finally got to touch base on the phone. Different conversation, though, than a lot of the ones we've had on the pod, and I'm really excited about the last couple of weeks of this podcast just from the standpoint of the different types of conversations we've been able to have with a guy like Kevin Fitzgerald last week, who's in a much different boat, just kind of up and coming in this industry still and carving his own path, to Mark Janes a couple of weeks ago, our first real in-depth conversation about racing and IndyCar, and Jim Rosenhaus today, who, I mean, everybody that we've talked to on this podcast has taken a very different career path in and of their own right. His is a unique one, and I was excited to dive into how he got himself to where he is now, and how his career has paid off for him, and certainly reaping the benefits now, being able to follow one of the exciting teams, one of the more exciting teams in Major League Baseball. So that is Jim Rosenhaus here on Play-by-Playcast. A lot of guests coming up over the next couple of weeks that we're recording over the next couple of days, actually. So I'm excited, in particular for me right now, because I'm gonna hear like the next 5 episodes in the next 3 days. So I'm excited about that, and excited for what is in store for you guys coming up over the next month or so here of the podcast. We're going to talk a lot about basketball. NBA season is winding down. The finals are currently, as I'm recording this, Cleveland is not going to win this game. So Golden State is up 1-0 in the finals. But those are the only 2 teams left, Golden State and Cleveland. So a lot of NBA guys that we're going to get to talk to and pick their brains over the next couple of weeks in particular as well. So we're going to talk some basketball and mix in some other stuff as we hit the summer months here, and we get some downtime in college. We'll probably dive into some college voices here as well, and probably try to stay some pretty active in the baseball community also. But that will do it for us here for episode 51 of Play-by-Playcast. Many thanks again to Jim Rosenhaus for clicking download or subscribe and joining us this week. Remember, rate and or review the podcast if you get the opportunity, and then follow us on social media as well. We are at PXPcast. And for this week, we're out.